Every election season comes with a ton of promises.
And I promise you that I will not let you down.
And a choice to make. But what if I told you there's a reason it doesn't really matter who wins? There are 3 key pieces to this puzzle, and by the end of this video, you'll see how we're being misled in plain sight. Despite the promises every election cycle, a massive chunk of the population still wakes up every day stressed about their bills, their rent, and the overall well-being of their families and themselves. And yet, the media and politicians seem to talk about everything but the real issues at hand. And they keep getting away with it. But how? There's an entire system at play that keeps this going. I've spent days digging into how the government actually functions, and the things I discovered are pretty unsettling. And what I found out might change how you see the next election.
Lobbying is about foresight.
The story starts in 1787, back when the Constitution was created. The First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees citizens the ability to influence government actions. This is what laid the foundation for legal lobbying. Lobbying. You've probably heard of it before, and it is the go-to villain in modern politics. The sad part is, it is much worse than you think. This piece of the legislature allowed citizens to petition the government to influence decisions that would affect their lives. Imagine you're a farmer in 18th century Iowa and you wanted to sell your crops to other states. You might go to Washington to convince lawmakers to build better roads so you're able to conduct your business smoothly. At the time, lobbying lacked regulation, and as the country industrialized in the late 19th century, rich businessmen, often called robber barons, heavily influenced political decisions to protect their interests. So the government had to do something to bring some transparency to this business influence over politics. And they came up with the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act, or the FRLA, in 1946. And obviously, it fixed everything that was wrong with lobbying and in the meantime created a perfect democracy. Sadly, that's not how it went down at all. This act required lobbyists to disclose their activities if they met a member of Congress face to face. But as long as they didn't directly talk to Congress, they had full freedom to do whatever they wanted. What this act did do, however, was formalize the lobbying industry, and it allowed people to take advantage of it while keeping things legal. By the 1990s, the lobbying industry was flourishing, with many firms and people whose entire jobs were to influence government decisions. So in 1995, to get a handle on this industry, the government passed a new law, the Lobbying Disclosure Act. It tightened some of the loopholes in the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act and pushed for more transparency. But if there's a will, there is a way. More on that later. In theory, it makes sense. If people outside the government want to protect their interests, they should be able to reach out directly to their elected officials. At its core, lobbying is about giving regular people the power to influence the decisions of the government directly. The argument for lobbying would be that it allows special interest groups to influence the government's decisions for the benefit of a group of people. And it could include organizations like worker unions, nonprofits, or human rights groups that are fighting to get normal people some favorable terms. But if a worker union can lobby to get higher wages for workers, a corporation could lobby to be able to continue paying them shitty wages.
A lobbyist's job is to be an expert in a certain field and then go and educate elected officials on those issues so that they have input from the people that they represent.
The people they represent. That's where this gets dicey. A lobbyist's input to an elected official will be whatever their clients want.
And our job is to work with them to change laws or to make laws that are favorable for the people who we represent.
And hiring a lobbyist to pursue politicians to make or change laws is not cheap. So even though lobbying is in place for people to keep the government in check, it just becomes a game of how much money you have and how much influence you can buy. And that's what brings us to...
That's why I say you can't spend $200 million on a campaign and not be owing people something.
The user and abuser of this power, aka the corporate world. Now, the corporate takeover of America is something that's been in the works for centuries. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the US underwent rapid industrialization, and wealthy business owners used their influence and money to shape policy decisions to grow their businesses. At the time, there was no regulation on how businesses could influence the government, but for the most part, it was done behind the scenes and could also be called bribery. With the inception of the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act in 1946, lobbying became a legal way for people to influence the government. Up until the 1970s, corporate influence in Washington was minimal. But this, along with America's political landscape, was about to change forever. It started with the corporations finding a new shiny toy, PACs or political action committees. Here's how they work. Imagine you and a group of friends all wanted the same person to win a school election, because you know they'll make decisions that will benefit you. So you all chip in money to help that person campaign, buy posters, ads, and all that stuff. In return, once they win, you expect them to make choices that help you out. PACs do have restrictions when it comes to how much money you can donate to a candidate or a party, but they can spend as much money as they want independently on ads and other indirect ways to support or oppose candidates. Now, around this time, another thing started working in their favor. Many government officials who had personal connections and a good understanding of government processes started moving to lobbying as a career. And why wouldn't they? It's an easy way to make tons of money if you have connections in Congress or other government agencies. But it gets even crazier. In 2010, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Citizens United that introduced Super PACs. Super PACs allowed corporations and other groups to spend as much money as they wanted on political campaigns, without any limits, as long as they didn't coordinate directly with the candidate's team. And obviously, we know they would never try to find ways around that. Long story short, at this point, we are stuck in a system where people with the biggest bank accounts have the most influence in what the government does. And the shitty part is that this happens out in the open. Corporations spend massive amounts of money to influence laws in ways that benefit them, whether that's lowering their taxes, easing up regulations, or getting government contracts. For example, in 2023, Big Pharma spent over $350 million on lobbying. Why? So they can control drug prices and keep making the profits they're making. Here's a list of the biggest spenders on lobbying in 2023. 95% of the top 100 spenders on lobbying are representing for-profit corporations. And if you look into some of the names on this list, you'll see what they are lobbying for. And it gets pretty dark. And the funny thing is that all of this information is public. So why is it that they can just get away with it?
Words are the new weapons. Satellites, the new artillery.
Without this, there is no way people will be okay with the way things are. It is pretty crazy that politicians and corporations work hand in hand to fill their pockets, while most people are forced to choose the lesser of two evils every election. And what's even crazier is that many people still believe that one of the two candidates will be the solution to their problems. That's where the genius of this whole thing lies. Unfortunately, how we see society is shaped by the media we consume. And when I say media, let's just put everything in there. The news, movies, books, and YouTube videos like this one. Let's think about politics and what we see and hear about politics in media.
Do not come.
I'm gonna do it!
And let's consider things like election campaigns, presidential debates, and political commentary, if that's what this is.
Wet ass P word. Make that pullout game weak. Yeah, you effin' with some wet ass P word.
The problem is the media coverage of politics, especially elections, is more spectacle than substance.
They got Beyonce.
And I know for most of us, learning about economic policies does not sound like a fun time. I would much rather watch this.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
But media turns every election into an existential fight between the right and the left, when in reality, the most pressing issues are either sidelined or watered down. And guess what? These major media outlets, which include everything from the news to social media platforms, are owned by the same conglomerates that benefit from policies keeping things the way they are. We are told we have a choice, but let's be honest, if the Democrats and Republicans are so different, why do the problems that regular people face never seem to change no matter who's in charge? The media and the two parties work really hard to paint the Democrats and Republicans as fundamentally different. What we're not told is how these debates are designed to keep us from looking at the bigger picture. They take different stances on the so-called culture wars like abortion, gun control, LGBTQ rights, and immigration. Knowing these topics will create passionate debate. While we're divided on these social debates, both parties remain aligned to make sure that the people filling their pockets get what they want. The current state of things paints a really depressing picture of the world, but it also raises a very important question. What can we do to change things? I like to think it's already kind of happening. If you are on social media and if you're looking in the right places, you will see a lot of awareness towards this. People are starting to recognize that the media and most politicians have agendas they're trying to push. And that's probably the reason you clicked on this video. There are many people that are making amazing educational content about things like this, and there are even more people consuming that content and engaging in thought-provoking conversations. Social media, for all of its downsides, allows information to reach people it would never have 10 years ago. And because of this, we are noticing the hypocrisy in politics. And as cheesy as it sounds, there is power in that. Does that mean things are about to change? Probably not, but maybe we are moving in the right direction. I'm sure at some point it will result in leaders emerging from people like us that will push the envelope and bring some real change. Unfortunately, that could take forever. But if you're wondering what you could do, I like to think that recognizing the game is the first step toward changing it. But have you ever wondered how we got here and why we are so willing to believe what people in places of authority tell us? It's not something that just happens. It's a result of a system that was created to make us obedient and conformist, and to stop us from using our critical thinking. You probably already know, but I am referring to the education system. And if you want to understand this better, I highly recommend you watch this video.